we go. Okay, we're officially recording. And so Greta, you had a question for the group?
I do. Okay, so here's where my question lies. It's about resources. And what resources do you keep around for your families, and what resources are you actually even referencing and that sort of thing as well in internet? But here's where it comes from. I have a resource library that we dwindled down to like anything that was more than 15 years old. We did a couple years ago, we got rid of, unless it was like our fave. Okay. Now, since that time, I've had like probably two people check out a book out of my resource library. So my question is to everybody, are you utilizing resource libraries? Are you not using resource libraries? Are your parents using them? Here's where I'm at. I feel like philosophically, I'm changing my philosophy about parent ed. There's something gnawing at me inside saying they are going to the internet. I need to be out on the internet and I need to use what they're using at some level. But here's the deal. I have a security blanket with Jean Isley Clark. I have a security blanket with Faber. I have a security blanket with them sitting on a shelf. And I'm concerned about and also many others, more current ones obviously as well too. I'm not just back in the 80s, but I don't know. Those are my questions. I'm a little nervous about going out to the internet, but there's like big little feelings that's amazing. Whenever I see what they put out regarding toddler discipline or toddler guidance, I'm like, I'm movers. I want to be a part of their group. And anyway, is that enough? Is that enough to go for? And I'm apologizing. I am on the road going to Wisconsin over near Green Bay to see my grandbaby. So I might cut out. But I wanted to see if anyone had any thoughts, and if we could get started, I can watch it later if I do. Is that okay?
Yeah, Greta, that's fabulous. And it's an incredibly important topic too, given the shift over the last 15 years with the internet. You figure there's a whole lot of parents that are going online anyway, right? I mean, they're going online instead of ECFE, they're going online. I mean, and this was actually part of our thought when we developed the Parentopia platform, was that parents would have a place that they could share resources from outside into ECFE in sort of an electronic way. But that went out the window because it ended up being much more sort of contained. But it was with that idea of resources from the outside, because I do what I especially, another thing in your question that I appreciate is the shifting nature of our roles as parenting educators. It's one thing when there is just a brick and mortar library of resources that a parent can go to either at a bookstore or at a public library, or maybe those that are available, say, in an ECFE program. Well, that's not the case anymore, right? And there are a whole lot of people, and not only are accessing information online, but they're curating that information and creating that information. So they're so there are parents who are writing blogs. There is certainly social media, the use of Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, things like that. Parents are contributing content, they're sharing content. And in this age of misinformation, I do think that does shift the role for those of us as educators. I certainly do it in my undergraduate classrooms, where I can't just give them a set of readings or a textbook or something like that. I also have to continually be aware of related information that is available to my students through the New York Times and through what they're getting through Instagram and things like that. Ask them to bring it in so we can talk about it, or for me to be aware, right? So anyway, I won't go on. But anyway, your question is, it's a fabulous question, because it starts with resource libraries, and are you using them? How are you using them? What do they look like? Things like that, which could also involve the internet, and I would imagine, Ellen has all kinds of resources internet-wise that she has, with her parents. But then also the shifting role for us as sort of mediators of parents' access and discussion of content. And so with that, again, I welcome everybody who is joining us. Greta's question is out there, and we'll just have at it. And again, the recording is on.
So I can share what I'm doing at Wayzata. So we, similar to you, Greta, we just moved into our new building. This is our second year. The year before we moved, so 18-19 school year, we went through our entire parent library in both of our parent ed rooms and weeded down what was published in, we went from 2010 and newer, and then anything that was older, unless we had like true reason to keep that book, everything else got donated. We also had the opportunity to update, and we got a lot of great new resources and new books. I have parents that will sometimes still check them out, but it's a pretty low used section of my parent ed room. One of the things that I talk a lot about in my classes, obviously I'm a little bit on the younger side. And so what I always tell my parents is, books are great and they're fantastic and they're a great resource. And there's a lot of people out there that we really want to remember the information that they shared. But I think in parents today, sitting down and finding time to actually read a parenting book is non-existent. And sometimes it's so overwhelming. And so what I've done is I have created a list of people on Instagram that I have gone through, people that recommend them to me, or I find them on Instagram. You can go back and find that person's credentials. So I have a list of people on Instagram who are professionals, have true credibility to what they're posting. And I have a list that I keep in a document, and I will share it, Sarah. I also have a list of people, and this is not an extensive list. I have more people that I follow that I really like, but they're parents sharing information and I can't find their credentials. And so I don't want to put that out there. And then, yeah, Sarah, I also have podcasts. So I have a list of people that I listen to, and I listen to some of their podcasts. There's too many for me to keep up with in my daily life. But again, it's those people that I know that are credible. A few of them are out on TikTok as well. If you haven't found Mr. Chaz, I highly recommend finding him. He is hilarious and absolutely amazing. He's on TikTok, and so you can sometimes find his TikToks. But I'm not a huge TikTok person personally. I'm more of an Instagram person. So I can easily share that document with everybody. But that's kind of where we're at, or where I'm at in Wayzata. I know, yes, Sarah. That's where I am at personally. I know that my colleagues are at different spots too. So that's my share.
I feel like in our district,
go ahead, Becca.
In my district, I feel like each parent educator kind of had their own things. And I don't have an office. My colleague whose last day was today, and so I'm super sad about that, but she had an office and she had a bunch of resources in her office. So if there was a parent or myself who wanted to borrow something that she had things available, but not a lending library. So our parent ed room didn't have resources for parents since I've been there, which I've only been there for 2.5 years. I suspect that if they had one, it was underutilized. And so it didn't seem worth keeping up.
We have one too. And like you, Naomi, when we moved in 2020, I threw out anything that just looked outdated. I kept the classics. So Greta, I kept the Faber, I kept the Jean Ilsley Clark. I think, and I remember posting about this on Friends of Family Ed. And I was like, do you have, I posted, and somebody was really upset that I was throwing away books. And they're like, But some of the books, you guys, it was like your 2-year-old and it had a kiddo in corduroy overall. No parent, like we might know there's good stuff in there, right? But no parent's going to pick that book up. They're just not going to do it. We threw out pretty much anything from before 1998. I was like, okay, I'm going to choose my high school graduation date. Like that's our cutoff. Like, that's old. Like, okay. Anyway, but
I love that, Ellen.
we have, and then I still like, can you tell what I'm doing next week? we're having some real sibling issues. And this is always a topic that I have to do some significant like brushing up on for new things because my kids loved each other. I never had to deal with sibling squabbles. But what I will do is I will say, I'm never, as a parent educator, I am never going to hand you a book and say, read this. I'm just not going to do it. Except I have told parents they have to read the first 60 pages of The Whole Brain Child. It's only the first 60 pages, because once you get past page 60, I don't even think it's page 60. It might even be page 45. Once you get past there, it turns into higher level thinking stuff that you really can't do with a kiddo until they're 6 or 7. I think that book is so valuable. And so that's really like the only one. But what I will say is I will like go through and I'll be like, this is a really good chapter to read before your baby arrives. Just read this chapter. And I think parents really appreciate that. But I also have not had anybody check out an actual book in a really long time. Now, that being said, I still will like go over to my shelf and be like, there's a really great chapter, like I've got these lovely flags. There's a really great chapter. What's this marked? I don't even know. I don't even know, but that's just kind of what I do. But as far as Instagram and podcasts, I have my favorites as well. And I share those with families. And I was just thinking I would put a little thing on my signature on my email that says Ellen's favorite online resources, so that parents always have a link to it. All they have to do is look for an email from me, and it's just there in my signature. So that just came into my brain, so that I don't have to be like, oh, I don't have to send a separate email. You've got it. It's there.
That's a great idea. Like that. I feel like it's like a philosophical or something. It's a deep rooted thing in me, how to look at how we teach and how it's changed. Like for me to like be able to be a little more okay if 5 of the mamas are going to this one site, to maybe take one of the things off that site and say, okay, let's talk about this. What are we seeing here? What questions can we ask about this? Or, I in the past really haven't done that very much. I don't want to be critiquing somebody's favorites, and I don't want to be I want it to be, like you said, quality with credential information. But anyway, I think I just feel a little loosening up, and I'm afraid of that. I guess so it's really good to hear what you guys are doing, because
Greta, I don't think this is any different. There have been, I'm thinking back to when I started 10 years ago, and I wasn't on Instagram 10 years ago, so I don't really know what was out there. But I remember reading some really wacky blogs, and, and I think even then you would parse out, like, this is really good information. Like, was it someone like Big Little Feelings where they really know what they're talking about? Or was it some mom who just had a really great, like The Military Wife and Mom, I think is one that I often see her stuff. It really resonates with me, but not everything resonates with me. So I think it's one of those things where we hand something to parents and say, this offers a different perspective. And you can say, I can't say I agree with everything this woman says, but in this regard, I think we're just still kind of the gatekeeper of this is good stuff. There's so much crud out there. And I think it's still our job to be able to say, this is really good and this is not so good. And I always tell
I'm sorry, Ellen.
Oh, I was going to say, I always tell parents too, if you're on any Facebook mom groups and there's any shaming or you shouldn't do that, get off. There is no reason to participate in those kinds of groups, so Yeah, I kind of feel like, and the other thing too, I've been using podcasts to listen to authors to get if I don't have time to read a book, you know how often if you Google, what's her name? Tina Payne Bryson and podcast, you will find a list of every podcast she's ever been on. And you can listen to the podcast in 30 minutes and pretty much get what you could out of 3 chapters out of a book.
That's brilliant. That's great.
You know what I mean? So we have to just say, this is really good information, or this is not great information, and let them be very honest about that. It's still our job to make sure they're getting relevant research-based material.
For sure. So, I know you wanted to say something, Susan, that along that line is, I come to a realization. I was listening to a teacher in preschool talk about a TV character that she thought was relevant to the kids, and the kids kind of looked at her and went, "What?" And then one kid said, "No, I usually watch this," and the other kid said, "What?" And the other said, "Well, I watch this," and they're, "What?" And one of the, and I'll explain this. The concern that came from the para is, she said, nobody's watching Saturday morning TV anymore and all watching the same thing. Kids are out on YouTube and they are watching different things. So to find a cultural norm or a shared language or a shared experience for preschoolers is getting tricky, except for what they do with themselves, right? Within the group themselves. But I'm talking about outside, bringing it in and using them as examples. I think we're just I'm realizing, and my eyes are opening to the idea that our culture has changed in that way. It is hard to find common grounds because nobody's watching Saturday morning cartoons or Little House on the Prairie at 3:30 on channel 11. I don't know. Just another thought that adds to the complexity of using good resources, and then also ones that relate, right, to the here and now for parents. Anyway,
So
those are my thoughts.
One thing I was just going to share, especially from what you both are saying. So I have the question I was going to ask, which I put over in the chat, was just if you ask parents to share. On a separate thing, the challenge with asking parents to share, given my related point over here, is a job that you're doing that is incredibly helpful is you're giving parents tools to be critical consumers, right? Because podcasts will change, Instagram influencers will change, TV shows will change, right? I mean, you say TV character, I think Barney. I had to look up who Daniel Tiger was when somebody mentioned it, so I don't know. Yeah. So, but you know, my emphasis in my Families and Technology course is to help students be critical thinkers about their use of technology in relationships, and technology in society, because it's going to keep changing, right? And so what I want them to do is to have the tool of critical thinking and to be a good consumer. And, you know, one role that we are slowly dancing into in parenting education is, you know, around good digital citizenship. And we're not just talking about, you know, helping parents know the content area around cyberbullying and, you know, sort of in a monitoring for their kids, but it's also that idea of when they consume information and they share information online, what is the role of us in parenting education to help them do that well, right? In ways that are safe and effective and useful, right? For them. And so I love this discussion about, you know, so when you share a blog that you're reading, and even, you know, and Ellen, even holding up the book and saying, see, I've earmarked, these are the first 60 pages of this book, you know, you're modeling a practice for parents that you don't need to read the whole book, right? You can read the portion that is most useful to you. There is no rule that says you have to finish the book, right? There is no rule that you have to listen to every single podcast episode. You can scroll through the content and listen to those episodes that are most related to. That's why the wonderful thing about with the internet, it's archived, just like going to a physical library, right? It's there and you can go back to it. Or pull out something. The challenge of asking parents, what they're listening to is there's that challenge, that potential for being critical about it, and then the parent sort of feeling like, oh, I'm wrong for, you're right, that was not a very good one. But if we bring it to them, like I bring to my students a little piece of research on device-free dinner time from Common Sense Media, and by then they already know that I like Common Sense Media and I use it a lot, so I'm not trashing them. My point in bringing out this little 2-page of research results is so that they can sort of tease out, what is this research report saying, and what is it really saying about using devices at dinner time, right? So it's really more of a critical exercise. And so by your offering, let's look at this blog, or let's look at this podcast, or let's, look at this book, let's look at this author. What is this author's, or this parent, just like you were saying, Ellen, I think that that's beautiful, right? To talk about, there are parents that can do stream of consciousness stuff and they're horrible writers and we would never follow them. There are parents that are beautiful writers that really grab us, but what they're saying is horse manure, right? Like, and they're kind of dangerous in a way because they're very seductive. There are parents that are very knowledgeable, but they can't write, out of their left elbow, and no one's going to follow them. And this is the danger of parents who have higher education. Like, nobody teaches you how to write for the public. And so it's just like, well, I want to show you how smart I am about all these parenting topics and all this stuff, but it's dry as dishwater, right? And then you have the super knowledgeable parent who just has that amazing way of conveying, the information, and that you can sort of harness and point to. Anyway, so all of this is just saying, I so admire this work that you're doing. And and the last thing I'll just say, because I want to get back to the resource library thing, is I don't know how many of you do still have the physical libraries of books, but I have to say that's such a comfort to me. When I walk into an ECFE classroom and I see the shelves filled with parenting books, there is a physical reality of knowledge that is in paper book form that people are surrounded by, that just like the rocking chair with a cushion on it that reminds you of nurturing a child while you're talking about, toilet training to your older child. I also think that ECFE classroom for parents that has the physical spaces of books that you sort of glance over and see these wonderful titles about positive parenting and, like taking care of yourself and it'll be okay and stuff like that. It's just, I don't know, maybe it's my generation, but I think that it's still just a wonderful semiotic in learning that is a reinforcer for because everything again is so digital that we don't see that stuff, right? So anyway, but I'll come back to your role in helping parents be good critical consumers of information online, and applaud you all around for doing that.
I have a question about the use of any kind of media for, so when you, like, for example, when you upended your resource libraries and threw away everything after 98, I'll pick on our friend from Northfield, but you keep the things that you really like, for example, whatever it is. My question is, how do we sort out? I don't have any trouble sorting out for me what are going to be things that are used well, but I have to tell you that anything about sleep training, no matter who wrote it, is really popular, and I weary of what everyone else is doing is the right thing. My mama's line was, just because somebody jumped off the Mendota Bridge doesn't make it a good idea. And, so I think there's a lot of things that are really popular that I really don't know when Ferberizing was written about, and I know he has credentials, but I'm not sure it's something I'm ever going to support. What I've heard of sleep training has been, I would put in that box. But how do you speak against the popular without judging the parent?
I have a response to that. It might be general, but I often ask groups if we can kind of do a crosswalk between what compassionate guidance, positive discipline would say about a specific, just are things broken down into simple steps? Are we looking to understand and hear the child, or all the things that we know that we can add, and so using that lens. And I often share at the very beginning of any ECFE class is that they'll come across a lot of parenting materials in their during their parenting years, always. And I hope that within ECFE, what they'll leave with is a lens, right? We all hope that they'll leave with a lens for viewing those. And so we'll take certain things, and there's one that most of the families now have never heard of it because it was a fad long ago. And so it's an example that I can use. But just asking even, have you heard of 1, 2, 3 magic? And what was it about that made it so very popular? And acknowledging like, yeah, it was a fad and a lot of people subscribed to it. But what would that crosswalk look like if we build that crosswalk with that book and a lens of compassionate guidance? So when we talk about toileting independence, and we can pull resources, right? We can go to 0 to 3, we can go to a lot of places. And certainly, they're reading things about actual methods, right? Like this is how you do it. My question is always bringing back to compassionate guidance. Is that the lens that is really coming forward in this process? Because we can get to a lot of results, but of course the question is, how did we get there?
Question.
Yep.
Nikki, that was beautiful. I love that. And I recognize conscious discipline, but I don't know about compassionate guidance. Is that just a term that you use to describe a mode for parents, or is it actually like a curriculum that's like conscious discipline?
Compassionate guidance just being positive discipline, that whole realm of connecting to our child. And when we think about like the levels of parenting or parent awareness, it's really that top level where we can really look at each individual child and figure out the tools and strategies that might work with that kiddo. When that's a strategy, we might list a guidance strategy in general, the use of a timer for certain routines, or I don't know. And for some kiddos, that might be super motivating. They're going to beat the clock. And others, they're going to break down and cry because it was stressful, and it might go in the punishment category, right? Will they ever use a timer with and for themselves in the future? Right? And so thinking about those long-term pieces. So I think what we are all thinking about in terms of positive discipline.
And I know in the past, if there's been a book, I've put in the chat that Baby Wise was a big fad for a while. And, we all know now that it was a disaster because parents thought that infants needed to be, infants should be on a schedule and that you strictly schedule them, and every now and then.
Nanny jobs, they made me read that, and they're like, we want you to take care of our infant this way. And it was really hard because I had just done postpartum doula training, and I was just like, I can't do it. I had to navigate between the parents of like, okay, this might not be the best resource. That was really, really hard.
Very hard. And every now and then, even though it's old and even though it's kind of been tossed out, the copies are still floating around, and people who used it when when my kids were little, because it was all the rage 16, 17, 18 years ago, well-meaning friends are like, use this. This guy got my baby to sleep through the night at 3 weeks. They're not supposed to. So occasionally I'll get, right. And I'm like, oh my God, burn it. Like, but every now and then, I'll have a mom who is like, oh yeah, we're going to do the Baby Wise. And so I'll just say, yeah, that was, at one time, a really kind of a really popular method that a lot of people were trying. And, you know, since then we've kind of learned that there's just a lot about the baby's body and breast milk and formula and digestion. I said, we kind of know a lot more about how babies operate and how they should take in their food. I said, some families might find it works for them. And my advice is give it a try. If it doesn't work, don't be afraid to throw it out. But I've also said things like, I don't have certain books because my colleagues and I, you know, we just kind of, I flat out, I don't know, maybe this is wrong. I will flat out say, if I don't like a book, I'll be like, I don't have a ton of sleep training books on my shelf because, you know, you can look at the sleep training books that I have and you can look at chapters, but I'm not going to hand this book to you and be like, here, your child will sleep through the night in 4 weeks. That's not the way it works. I don't know. I just flat out say that I just don't think that's I don't know if I agree with that method. You can try it. I don't know. I'm not going to sugarcoat it if I think something is crap.
I mentioned too, we talk a lot about listening to our guts. Like, especially as mamas, we have such good intuitions. And I always just say, along with I have a dog who wants to lick my face here. I just say we have a really good intuition and we need to listen to it. And some of us that's easy for, and some of us that's really hard for. And then I just always ask parents, you know, can you provide an example of when you listen to your gut and it went well, or maybe opposite? You know, I don't say this obviously right off the bat because I feel like we have to build a relationship to get into like talking about intuition because, you know, some people that's hard for, but you know, so just in that lens too, just what feels good to your gut. When you read something, we get that sense, just like we talk to our kids about that feeling, right? Like we get that feeling too. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but.
Well, yeah.
Along with,
I'll
ahead.
just throw in about culture, because a lot of these things too, when we talk about feeding and sleeping and things like that, are very culturally based. And I think that we also have to walk that neutral line as white women often, you know, for those of us who are, usually you accept it, you know, is to remember, and this is why, Megan, I want to, you know, align with you on the intuition thing, because I also think about, I know when our daughter was having a hard time sleeping, you know, and I was sort of like scanning the books, that a lot of it for me was like negotiating with my husband, you know, who's going, I can't let her cry, you know. So it's also within a family system, right? And so within that family system is also our culture, and different, you know, cultural practices have very different, you know, beliefs and values and norms and practices around sleep and around eating and about independence in eating and things like that. So I'll just throw that out as just another consideration that, you know, in the wider discussion.
Well, and I also always share with families, like I had the books on how to get your baby to sleep through the night. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I was looking at the chapters and I still had an infant who would stand at the crib rail until he vomited. And I thought, this is garbage. I'm not going to do this. Right. So you know what? I got up through 2 hours, 3 hours, and I fed him until he was 14 months old. So I use that as an example to say, just because you have a book doesn't mean, or even you follow all the steps on a website or taking care of babies and you take a course, it's not always going to work. Sometimes you just have a feral child and they have to grow out of this phase that they're in, which I think a lot of parents feel like failures, whether they're reading a book or they're reading. And I had a mom today say that I talked about how much I love Dr. Becky at Good Inside. Like I love everything she says. I think she's fantastic. But I had a mom say she had to stop following her. She said, because I don't have the patience with my 3-year-old right now because my newborn is getting up every night. And I feel like when I see her scripts and how I'm supposed to talk to my child, I'm not doing any of that. And it makes me feel like crap. So I stopped. I'm like, good for you. You know what you can handle. So I think, again, it's teaching them how to be the gatekeepers of their own, whether it's podcasts or books or documentaries or whatever, to stop the flow of information when they feel overwhelmed.
I always talk a lot about like kind of everything that you guys are saying, where it's like, what's your intuition telling you, like what, all this stuff. But I'm also like, you have values and things that you're trying to recreate in your child and really just enforce in your child and your family. Every structure is different. And I work with, you know, kind of to what Susan was saying with, I have a lot of families from lots of different cultures. In my outreach classes, you know, we got on the topic of going to another country to see, you know, extended family, and the cultural norm of like hugs and physical touch. And this mom is like, my child's just brand new 3, grew up in a pandemic where we weren't allowed to touch people or get close to people. And she's like, now when she's near people, she gets really uncomfortable, and often that looks like screaming. And she's like, how do I get her ready for this experience? And of course, my personal like hot buttons going off, like full blown, like don't. But then I kind of took it back as like, here's what I have learned, and here's what I know, and here's a personal take on this because I have a very personal background in that. But, and then I just said, but I want you to remember that you are her parent and you are the one that makes these decisions. These are my ideas. This is what I think is valid research. This is why I think this is good. But I always remind my parents in all of my classes that this is some ideas. This is not the right way. There is no manual that we hand over to you in the hospital and say, follow these steps and you're going to be great. Because as each of you said, every child's different. Different things work for different kids. And so I really try and foster that, like what feels right for you. And I really like what Nikki said too, where it's like, let's look at the pros and cons of this. Let's look at both sides of this. What happens if we do it this way? What happens if we do it that way? And which one is right for your family? I really try hard to take my own personal biases out of it because I'm not in your home. I'm not living the life, kind of like you said with Dr. Becky. I love her too, but there are definitely moments that she says stuff and I'm like, girl, that is not reality right now. Like, thanks, but no thanks.
Two things occur to me. One is I wonder how trauma and other people's experience impact how good their intuition is. Some of us just have about a variety of things. And the other one I was thinking about was that there are some things that certainly, I mean, when I started as a parent educator, which I know was 100 years ago, we were told very clearly that co-sleeping was never okay in any circumstance. And now we all know better than that. I hope that there's appropriate, and it seems like parents are comfortable saying that in class. That's kind of my marker for, you know, and somebody says, well, how do you get your child to sleep? Well, we co-sleep or whatever else. So people feel comfortable talking about it. But I grew up in a home where discipline was very harsh, and it was impacted by the fact that the person who was doing the most harsh disciplining was an alcoholic. And I became a parent educator because I knew I didn't want to do that, but I didn't know what else to do because there was nothing in my experience that told me what was different. I think both culturally and the sense of trauma, and a lot of people define the pandemic as trauma all by itself. Not sure I buy that. But I think that it's helpful to think through some of the pieces that we like. For example, I tell my parents when we're talking about discipline, there's not just one way to do this. There's not. But I can tell you that if you tell me that you're smacking your kid on a regular basis, that's I'm a mandated reporter, and I would need to report that. However, if you tell me that you're having trouble knowing what to do in discipline and you don't share that other information, we can talk. We can talk about anything, but if certain things are told, I have to share that. I also tell parents, I'm not a mandated reporter. If you are suicidal but I'm not going to let it drop there. I'm not. My commitment is that not. So I think that there's other impacts to some of the pieces that we're talking about. I get that parents are stressed in the pandemic and in parenting with littles. I totally get that. But I think about things like, for example, Nikki, I love the phrase toileting independence. I don't know why I've never heard those two words put together before, but it says exactly what I'm trying to convey, and those were not words I had. So I know she's gone, but so I'm thinking through some of this stuff is just challenging and interesting.
We have year-long classes, so I have a very long time to talk about all kinds of stuff I want to talk about because I'm not in semesters. And I tell my parents when we get to discipline, we are going to talk about this for 4 weeks. Yes, 4 weeks. I know that's a very long time to talk about this topic, but I cannot adequately give you enough information in 1 week about discipline because there's too many layers to it. There is not one way. There's not one circumstance where something works. Kids in the House has a really great video on spanking, and I do talk about it in class. And what I like about the video is it doesn't do the shame and blame piece because, again, I'm not a big shame and blame person. However, again, that's another one of my hot buttons. And so I think she does a really nice job of saying, like, if you're getting to the point where you're resorting to hitting or spanking your child on a regular basis, there's a problem and you are no longer effectively disciplining and you need to start looking for other resources. So I think most of my parents take it as like a wake-up call of like, oh, okay, maybe this isn't. And I also save it for the end. So we've talked about all these other appropriate ways to discipline. And then we'll talk about this so that at least they have this wheelhouse of all these things. I don't know if that's the right or wrong way to do it, but.
I love the idea of really spending time on discipline. I think a lot of parents stress out about it and worry about, are they doing it right or not? And using the example of spanking as being a red flag for yourself rather than shame and blame. Like just shifting that perspective. You're not changing your message of it's okay to spank or something like that feels really wrong to you as an educator, but you're also not blaming the parent. You're saying, hey, this is a red flag for yourself. I just really love that way of reframing something. It can be really challenging, especially for parents to be vulnerable about in class.
That was one of the things I was going to ask about today. I don't think we're going to have time though. I had a dad show up first time ever, and he swore at me in the first 30 seconds of my interaction with him because he came to the wrong door for my email. Yeah. And he refused to put a mask over his nose, and he refused to put a mask on his daughter. And I was like, oh God, we're off to a really great start. He came to 2 back-to-back classes. And in the second class, he said, when his toddler hits, he hits him back. So never, and he missed last week, of course, when we were doing introductions and getting to know you stuff. Right. So in the middle, and so that my question is, how do you diffuse? And I have not had this in a long time. I want to say it's been 3 years since I've had this happen. So I'm out of practice, but diffusing those moments where it's not the right thing. We know that, right? We know that. The parent doesn't know that. Other parents in the group also may not know that, right? And making sure that you're not making them feel stupid or shaming them, but also giving them an alternative. And I think I handled it well. He was like, we just hit him back because, then he knows how it feels. And I was like, oh God, here we go. I have hold it together. And of course it was in like the last 2 minutes. The EA and the teacher are cleaning up, I'm like, oh my God, kid, let's go. So I was like, sometimes it feels like that is like, duke it out, let them do it to each other. And, I said, but, unfortunately, these little ones, especially 18-month-old, they're all about making sure that we are showing them the boundaries, and so we want to make sure that they know that we're the safe people. And so moving ourselves away and saying, oh, I'm not going to let you hit me, it sends a really powerful message for them to know that, oh, that wasn't what I intended, and, I obviously I made it better than that, and he was like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. So I was like, okay, the group heard me say, that's not okay, without saying that's not okay. Anyway, it's really hard in those moments to not say, I just really wanted to say, don't F it up, Ellen, just don't F it up, but back to the spanking thing. I don't know this guy. I don't know him. This was hour 2 with him, but I was just playing defense, and I felt like he was a time bomb that was going to go off. And I'm not looking forward to Tuesday. I'll tell you that right now. So anyway, maybe that's another topic for another day, diffusing those hot situations where you can get in trouble real quick, trying to think fast to save the group.
I have a thing that I introduced during my, just when we're doing group guidelines, and I have it on the wall, but I ask 3 questions and I introduce them at the beginning, and I tell them, we are going to talk about so many things that are so hard in parenting. We think about strategies that are long-term and short-term, how we got into what we're doing. And the 3 questions that are listed are when considering how to proceed, what will this action teach my child? How will this impact the parent-child relationship? And how will this action potentially impact my child's self-confidence or self-esteem? And so if something like that comes up, I don't know if I could do it with a new parent like your situation, Ellen, because it's so new. But I might actually, I will go back to that and say, Gal, this is so hard that we have these emotional and these escalated moments with our kids. I wonder if we can take a look at these questions here that we use in our group guidelines, and just ask if they want to go through those, and just think about that in terms of what is posted. It's so hard, right? But sometimes that can de-escalate and diffuse because we're just saying, I get it, I hear you, and this is so hard, and let's think about the short term and the long term. But if it's posted, it might feel different. I don't know.
I love that, Nikki. Thank you. And I think, yeah, what was it? How will it impact the parent-child relationship? How will it impact self-esteem? How will it move the relationship forward? Is that what it was? Susan and I are trying to piece it together.
Yeah, I think
what
one was on.
The questions, what will this action teach my child? What effect will this action have on my relationship with my child? And what effect will this action have on my child's self-confidence or self-esteem?
Yeah. I like that idea of having it posted because, I show a couple videos in my class, in my undergraduate class, of dads going viral online, and it's in the context of parent-child relationships, right? And I actually use the questions somewhat from reflective dialogue, and because it sort of brings it back to how is the child, how would the child feel in this situation? And in these situations, the child is somewhere between 13 and 15. And, but it's just like, what is the father trying to accomplish? What is the, how will the child feel? And then, what will this mean to the relationship, going forward? And I think you can interchange, like with Nikki's questions too. So the nice thing with those general questions is when they're posted, 1, they're not situational. 2, you're not calling out that situation and saying, let's apply these to you because you're kind of messing it up, right? it's not, right? It's just like, because they're almost like ground rules that are always there. There are those guiding questions that always guide us as parents, and we have them posted because we all believe in them, right? And so I love, Nikki, that idea that they're there and then you can refer. And so then it's just like any good thing that's posted in our rooms, we use it as a teaching thing, right? That it's just like, that's a really good situation. So as we're talking about this, but I also don't want to minimize, Ellen, the very hot situation, right? That this happens. And in the end, you know, and in the context for you, right? That this is a dad, A, you don't know very well, B, raises this really tough issue at the end of class. And we've talked about before in this setting too, sometimes there are parents that are, you know, like they're posturing, like there's a power dynamic there, right? And it's almost like a prove me wrong, like, and I'm gonna wait until the end of this class when you can't do much about this, and I'm gonna throw this landmine out there, right? And so again, to give ourselves grace for these contexts of when these really challenging things come up. And I appreciate you bringing it up, because I do think it is something to revisit, because it happens to all of us. You know, one of the things we're talking about now at the university is microaggressions, right? And what you do about them, and do you talk about them, and how do you handle them? And especially if it's between students, right? Sort of raising that. And so it's a universal thing. When you have these really hot button things, you don't want to shame anybody, but you're thinking about the entire group, right? You're thinking about yourself, you're still in teaching mode, you're in mentoring mode, you're in facilitating mode. So it's sort of like parenting educator PhD, right? I mean, it's like advanced, advanced practice. And oftentimes you're doing it with such a diverse group of parents that you may have parents there who are from different cultures and different languages or different abilities, with, you know, or with a special needs child or something like that, that whatever is being modeled and discussed and all of that, you're also holding them in your mind too, right? You want it to be relevant to them. So. Just reading through the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Happy belated birthday to Becca, by the way, but she's gone. So. Oh, which does bring up just a little community thing. I would let, you know, and I know we have like some people who are here every week and some people that are not here every week, but it would be wonderful to celebrate birthdays or any other major event. So, and Facebook can only tell us just so much. So if you or somebody in the group, you know, is having a birthday, please let us know, because it'd be great to give you a big virtual hug and possibly sing.
Thanks, Susan. I love that. I'm also reading Mary Kay's comment here. Do you have the relationship with the person who spanked you that you want to have with your child?
That's a really good thing to put in your pocket to hang out, you know, just
trying to
like
memorize that, commit that to memory.
response.
So how's that
yeah.
going for you with your kid?
Yeah.
I'm gonna copy that. I've copied so many things from the chat today. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, what a great conversation. And like I said in chat, I was, you know, we start with Greta. Greta, did all of this answer your question?
Yeah, I hope so.
It was great. It was awesome. Thank you. I really appreciated it. So there's so much good stuff in the whole thing. I mean, we could spend an hour on many of these topics. I just love it. So
yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. But thank you for getting us started talking about parent resource libraries, and it just has really taken off, and we can always come back to that conversation too about resources and sharing resources and how we share resources and what are those resources, and critical thought skills for parents to be good consumers and sharers and all of that. So thank you. Well, I guess, is anybody else have anything else? I know a few people have needed to check out for 1 o'clock meetings. The snow is steady here in St. Paul. Great. Well, all right, everyone. Well, have a fabulous weekend. Is Naomi gone? I guess she is gone.
Mhm.
I'm just counting down for,
Yes.
I'm going to stop the recording.